Well, welcome, Paul. Thank you for sponsoring the Great British Expos and just making all of this happen today and having faith in us. We regularly do a programme every Friday we do, talking about the life of an entrepreneur,
68.
the DNA of an entrepreneur. How many programmes have we done during lockdown?
68, I think.
68. I think we've welcomed, was it something like 8,500 SMEs attended virtually our event during that period?
Yeah, you can make numbers prove anything, can't you, Alex? So.
But Paul, obviously we're going to be talking about the ingredients of a successful business and exit strategy today. It is a live Q&A, so if anyone's got any questions, you can ask Paul, we can put them to you. But Paul, before we even start, just tell people who you are, your background, and why you're talking about business and exit strategies today.
Yeah, so it's an interesting theme today. So I was listening to Kyle, who was talking at 9, I think it was.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the fear of failure, which I think is maybe one of the most important things in business. So I was going to talk about courage today, how important courage was in business, and not being frightened to fail. And then, of course, we had speaker 11:15 talking about, 10:15 talking about barriers to growth. So I've been, so Aspen Waite was formed 28 years ago, 28 years, 2 months and 2 weeks. And before that I worked for 2 of the big top 4 firms of accountants. I basically became a corporate all-rounder by the time I was about 28. Rather foolishly or bravely set up Aspen Waite when I was 33. And we've been going for 28 years now. One thing I would say about myself is I'm a sort of great believer if 5 people can do something, then I can. So, and that's so right from an early start. So I had no clients at all to start with. Had a business plan for £35,000 of turnover in the first year, did 78,445, not that I can remember. And within 2 years, managed to pick up a big contract with First Group PLC, who are Great Western Trains now today. Started off as financial consultant for planned Central and East European expansion, and within 6 months became managing consultant. So I think one of the things about business, I think, is adaptability. So I'd like to think that my career has proven that you don't have to be a one-trick pony, and that if you take basic principles and ideals, you can translate them into a diverse range of businesses, which and I've also, as Alec knows, I was very fortunate to act for the world's leading rally champion, Mark Lovell, and his businesses. We probably got to about 10 million turnover before he died, and then he was killed in his farewell rally, and I effectively took over running the business, and we got to over 100 million of turnover. That was in the shipping and logistics and car space. And I suppose the other thing would be I suppose quite significant about my career is I've been heavily involved in innovation since I was about 29. So I ended up by default becoming the chief executive of a biodegradable polymer company when I was 30, which was an extremely hairy experience. I remember reaching for my brown corduroys, but got through it. And I think the thing I would say that came out of that particular experience was the importance of telling the truth and being honest. So I inherited a pile of rubbish, really, lots of creditors, no real prospects, and I basically never lied to the creditors, told them, the reality, and somehow or other we got there. And I think 6 months after I became chief executive, I signed a contract with British Technology Group in London, and the company ended up floating on OFX.
Wow.
So Aspen Waite itself started off as a niche firm of chartered accountants. So basically, putting an arm around people and giving a more personal service than perhaps people are used to. And then about 8 years ago, I had a bit of an epiphany moment, and decided the future was in professional services and expanding the range of services to hopefully provide everything that a business could need. And so, of course, that in itself is highly disruptive. So I'd like to think, maybe I could be regarded as the most disruptive, in many respects, actually, if you've had a drink with me, one of the most disruptive people in my space, if not the most in the country.
I mean, Paul, you've gone from new startup to growing the business, and then I think during lockdown you were in the top 100 accounting firms in the UK.
Before lockdown, yeah.
Top 100 accounting firms in the UK. It's been quite a journey, and during that journey, what would you say was the most challenging from startup to be getting into the top 100?
In my particular case, because of my background, I would say beyond all doubt the most difficult thing was surviving in the first 2 or 3 years. So actually I found the bigger we get, the more comfortable I am, because I'm getting back to what I was used to, if you see what I mean. So it's quite nice actually. So I don't have it, without being arrogant, I wouldn't doubt my ability to run a $1 billion business,
Yeah. And when what was your first day at Aspen Waite like when you first started?
Terrifying.
You left one of the big four. What was your first day like?
Lots of phone calls and trying to get business and worrying. Yeah. But yes, we'll come on to this in a minute. So I think one of the things, if we go on, one of the just put them all up. So we're actually not going to do a presentation as such. So I think one of the things that, so when I started Aspen Waite, I didn't really have all the skills I think that were relevant to running a business, to be truthful, which is why the thing about making mistakes is so relevant. So because I didn't really know any better, I was basically put on the planet to be a nice sort of friendly, proactive accountant to help people, and perhaps not very good at dealing with a certain type of salesy type person. Probably had quite a bad debt record because I'm too soft and things like that. So of course you only learn these things through experience. One thing I did instinctively, which I'm quite proud about actually, is I think on my first day or my second day, I had a meeting with a designer from Bath.
Okay.
And I basically said, I like purple. Purple's my favourite colour, so my brand's going to be purple. So he sat down and did me some designs about, and the good thing about Aspen Waite is the A and the W obviously makes for a good thing in itself. So I think I paid £450, wow. Which obviously quite a lot in those days, bearing in mind I didn't have any money. So I actually paid to have a brand, and then of course, when you look at the progress we've made from that initial brand, which in itself I was quite proud actually. It didn't take very long for other companies to plagiarise and copy what I was doing, and that so it gives you a sort of feeling that you're on the right tracks.
I mean, Paul, when you look at branding, quite often with organisations, I know you've got media services now, and marketing and branding is something that very few businesses actually invest in. What would you say to businesses or to some of the audience here about their marketing spend or actually investing? When you said you didn't have £450, but you found the money because you knew how critical it was to have the right image and right brand.
Well, yeah, I think branding and the ability to differentiate yourself from your customers for your competitors is absolutely essential. So, it's all about. So we go back to the beginning, Alec, and look at the first picture, the key ingredients. Obviously just my opinion, but
shop window.
No, the one before that. So if we look at this, for instance, I don't know. I look at that and I feel proud because I think it's a very striking image. And you can see, so we have a really fantastic designer, don't we, Charlotte? Who's so Charlotte's head of marketing in Aspen Waite, by the way. So we have a fantastic designer called Lara, who's worked for Coca-Cola, for instance. And so this is we used to think that we were cutting edge, and this has taken it onto a new level. So you can see we sort of developed this theme now about. Businesses are never alone, and everyone needs a friend, which I think is true. So I think most of you will know who've run a business. It can be quite lonely, can't it? It can be quite lonely in business. So having support and all that. So the idea of this is obviously the fact this guy is climbing the mountain or whatever, but there's a face to it, and obviously the colours have stood the test of time. And I think, again, one of the things I was talking about earlier is if you look at our colours, they're now quite, they are the most common colours you see generally in marketing, I would say.
Great. So Paul, you've got your key ingredients, decisions and ingredients, and it starts off with great shop window into the world. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so basically that's just basically saying that your business needs to look, it's obvious. I think another way of looking at this is, passing on hard-earned experience to other people. Is one of the things I realised quite early in my career was one of the things you needed to do was to take away the ability for people to say no to you, if you see what I mean. And that could be for a whole range of people, a range of things. I can remember, for instance, turning up at a new client in my Granada Scorpio G600 MYA, again very sad. And I can remember sat down with the managing director, him looking at the car, and I was, in my mind, I could see speech bubble, like, is this car consistent with who this guy says he is, for instance, So, so things like, having a website. So when people check you out, they go on the website and, it's representative of what you say you are. You dress appropriately. You've got all the accoutrements that people would expect.
The other thing as well, Paul, you said, one thing I learned from the programs that we do is you talked about going to the bank manager and making it impossible for someone to say no, and making sure you've got your business plan and all your ducks in a row. Do you want to talk to businesses about that? Because sometimes people forget that, but I remember those early lessons that you had. You made it impossible for your bank manager to say no to you, didn't you?
Well, no, so I think the best way to look at this. So I think if you had to look at probably one golden nugget, you'd say that was the Bible of anybody running a business. It would be to have a business plan. So to have a business plan. So operationally, technically, and financially. And I think the other thing that people often don't do is they don't concentrate on all aspects of their business. So you have like Rolls-Royce manufacturing, but very poor financial recording, for instance. I think it's very important for businesses to have the same quality all across the business. When it comes to what Alex talking about, I always try when preparing a business plan, whether it's for myself or for a client, to effectively sit there and think. Right, I'm a bank manager, for instance. If I'm looking at this plan, you give them so much information in the right way that they basically can't ask you any questions. All the questions they have are there in front of them, so they've got the answers to it. And I think that's just common sense, really, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. So we've done clear business plan and objectives, legal structure.
Yeah. So the world has changed immensely. So when I started in Aspen Waite 28 years ago, I would say probably in the accountancy space, the most clients were unincorporated businesses, so sole traders and partnerships. Do we have any sole traders and partnerships here today, or are you all limited companies? So, you're a sole trader.
Yeah.
So so I say it would have been very typical, and I would think probably a typical accountancy practice maybe 75%. I've always been against the trend. So even when I started with nothing, I think probably after about 3 years, 70% of my clients were limited companies, which obviously mirrored my own experience and skill base. So legal structure is basically saying you need to think about what is the appropriate structure for you. So in my view, for instance, there's obviously benefits of having a sole trader or partnership business, particularly if you own cars, so you don't pay P11D benefits on cars. So Aspen Waite, for instance, has a partnership, particularly for that reason. So it's efficient tax planning. Usually, as a general model, when you're growing a business, having a sole trader or partnership is very effective up to a certain level of profitability, which I think normally it comes at the point where your profits are significantly greater than the amount of money you need to live on. So that's not what people would write in a book, but that's actually the reality. So the fact of it is, if you need 100 grand to live on, then you need 100 grand to live on. So So probably, but now there's no real good reason why you wouldn't trade as a limited company, which is why it's actually quite rare now for a business not to be one. And obviously you get a lot more benefits and tax breaks from operating a limited company. And of course, I think people don't seem as concerned about this as when I was younger. You have limited liability itself. Obviously, operating a company within reason, unless you commit criminal offence, you're not personally liable for the company's debts.
I mean, I know, Paul, when we were doing our programme, funding in a sustainable financial model is massively important to people now, especially post-COVID. What advice would you give to us about that?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, most businesses, as you know, I think something like 3/4 of businesses don't last 3 years. And the vast majority of businesses fail because they run out of money. There's a fact. So, and you can actually have, on the face of it, a very successful business that runs out of money. So, that can come about through what's called overtrading, for instance, where effectively you've picked up more work than your working capital is able to service. So it's very important when you start off in a business or as you're growing that you're thinking about what is the appropriate model for you, and also what type of funding is relevant. So you've got debt finance, for instance, which is borrowing from banks, and of course at the moment we had the C-bills, the banks-backed loans, the new recovery loans, for instance. And then of course you've got equity, which is your own capital. Probably most people when they start a business get some degree of support from their network, with their friends and family, and obviously from the perception of the outside world, and also lenders' perception. Having some degree of your own equity injection is highly important.
I think you're right. The financial model. I remember you talking about when you first started your business, you didn't take a salary for so many periods.
Didn't have any money.
Yeah. But again, you made sure that the salary you're talking, the dividends were sustainable. You created a financial model, didn't you, to keep the business viable?
Yeah, well, I think so one of the things I talk about later is what I call sincerity of ambition. So we're not going to sort of go through this in a formulaic way. So I think at the end of the day, you have to be. I think you have to be genuine. So sincerity of ambition means: do you really believe in your business? Is it just a vanity project, or a load of giving it this, or are you totally committed to your business? So my mother's maiden name is Scott, and with that, so my mother, for instance, is very frugal, and she walks into Iceland with £1, she buys fish fingers for 78 pence. And that's the way I was brought up. So at the end of the day, you can't, in my mind, you can't spend what you don't have. Now, of course, we all know businesses where that isn't the case. You get the sort of classic scenario of the 7 reasons businesses fail, like flagpoles and water fountains and all this, which are very sort of vanity-driven things, aren't they? No, so I think it's very important to understand your cash flow, what your business can afford to do and not do. One of the things I also think is very important, and this is something, looking back, I'm quite proud of myself because although I wasn't fit for business in many respects, one of the things I do remember thinking about very early on in the first few days was whether I had effectively an income or a capital model, if you know what I mean by that. So basically, was I creating a business that was profit-centric, i.e., I wanted to have the best personal lifestyle I could have, or was I building a business that I thought was worth something? And I 100% did the latter. So my whole focus of my business life has been on creating value and reinvesting profit into making Aspen Waite bigger and stronger and more diverse. And that's one of the reasons why, doing a bit of a self-plug, why I obviously wrote the paper on the Tory government betraying the business community with the reduction of entrepreneurs relief from £10 million to £1 million, which I considered to be a betrayal of everything I'd worked on. So I basically started off my business with the expectation that I could build a business to £10 million value and pay 10% tax. And then Rishi Sunak takes that away and says that anyone that makes more than £1 million is basically a fat cat and, you know, deserves to perish in the gates of hell or whatever. You know, so that's something I feel very strongly about. So I think it's important that, you know, people like me have a voice and speak up for people, because I think, you know, one of the things that's is true is governments don't understand small businesses at all. You know, if you listen to the budget speeches or government ministers talking about business, they're actually talking about large corporations. So even when they think they're not, they're never talking about people like us, if you like.
And actually, that's loads of fun. That's when we're going to get through the presentation. So yeah, creating a strong customer-centric culture.
Well, I think, you know, so one of my favourite clients always used to say service, 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 service. So I think, you know, and I certainly, my default position always, sometimes being in danger of being too busy, which is a terrible word to use, is I would never. So my default position is never to let down my customer service levels. So at the end of the day, you know, you have a great business because of great people. So I think probably one of the most important things I think in a business, and I know this isn't true of all businesses, but my business has values. So we are people that stand for something, you know, old-fashioned values, I would say. Things like integrity, your handshake means something, you know, you can be trusted, you know, those sort of things. And I think if you invest in good people and you believe in them, we have. So, for instance, we had a new DJ start recently. He was only 18 years old, you know, one of the things I was struck from. So I spent quite a lot of time with him. He has a wisdom vastly in excess of some of his colleagues who are much older. You know, so it's a great example of age. Age is not the determinant. It's.
Some people may be thinking, why are you employing a DJ? They may not know about Aspen Waite Radio. So tell our audience about Aspen Waite Radio and what your project's been during lockdown. Yeah,
so probably there's probably the craziest thing I've ever done in my life, I guess. I'm hoping one day before I finally push up the daisies that it might be regarded as also brilliant. So the jury's out at the moment. So I think you have to be honest about these things. So probably about 5. I don't really know. So one of the things Alec and I talk about a lot is what is the essence of an entrepreneur. And I remember Alec being quite shocked when I said to him that I considered that very few business owners were entrepreneurs. You know, I think there's a general sort of view that if you're a business owner, you're an entrepreneur, and I don't agree with that at all. I think I probably could count on my fingers the true entrepreneurs I've met in my lifetime. And I think entrepreneurs just think differently and they see things which other people don't see. And one of the things that's been very interesting actually doing the Friday show with Alec is he's made me articulate what I've never had to articulate before. And I found it very useful actually. Which also, so I've got 3 copies of my latest book there if anybody wants one. And I've found, for instance, book writing much easier because having the sessions with you on the Fridays has made me think about I have to explain to other people why I did something, and it's quite interesting because you don't always know yourself. I don't really know where the idea came from. I remember sitting there, you know, because I came up with the idea of having a radio station, and then I think, you know, as a responsible business owner, or fairly responsible, I then spent. I talked to some people who knew something about it. I'd had a very good relationship with the local radio station ever since I started, and basically sort of just left it on the back burner. So nothing really happened for a bit, and then one of my youngest son's best friends, who I'd known since he was 11. So again, I'm a great believer in sort of, how can I put it, helping your own, I'd call it. You know, so you extended family, you know, friend of a friend is a friend. That sort of attitude. So Drew is actually a semi-professional musician, and I gave him a job. And to my surprise, to this day, who would think that at the time he was 27, I think, who would think that a 27-year-old man would give more to a 56-year-old man than the other way around? So taking him on completely changed the wiring of my brain. So I went, I became far more creative. And of course, because of Drew's personality, which is very sort of, hey man, you know, let's go and get a piece of hash cake in Amsterdam sort of attitude. You know, he would encourage me to sing and jam and stuff, you know, and it just sort of changed the way you think. And then just instinctively we started doing podcasts, probably about three and a bit years ago, maybe more. And they were enjoyable and I think also quite groundbreaking. So I think we were probably at least a year ahead. And now I think it's considered doing podcasts is just taken for granted, isn't it? That you do podcasts. So we started doing that, and then actually maybe is it 2 years ago when the last time we did this, Alec?
Yeah,
at Reading.
Years, yeah.
So young Ben Eltham there is doing the video, so available for hire at very extortionate rates, by the way. Talk to Ben later. We started sponsoring a program called Back of the Net, which Ben produced, and I think you're involved in, Charlotte. So Back of the Net is a football program, football magazine program for non-league football, and I met one of my business colleagues introduced me to Ben properly in Reading, in a hotel down the road, and Ben said to me, "Why don't I come along to your presentation at Green Park and film it?" And basically he did that, and we had a cup of tea, and against all sort of rationality, a couple of days later, Aspen Waite Radio was effectively formed, and I think it's a good example actually, and this is why I think it's important that people are honest about things. So I would describe it as we didn't really know what we were doing when we started, you know, because the thing is, because it's so different. As far as I'm aware, there is no professional services company in the world that has a radio station, so there is nothing to follow. You know, there is no model to follow. You know, and I think, you know, without being rude to Ben, so I think Ben came from a traditional radio background, so his thinking was, you know, what do Absolute Radio do? You know, what sort of audience to heart appeal to 30 to 45-year-olds? Where of course what we are is we're about everybody. You know, Aspen Waite is supposed to be is very important to me that that we look after everyone from 0 to 100. So I want the music station to engender the same things. So it's funny. A guy came up to us on the radio stand earlier, and he said, "What does real music?" Because one of our things, it says real business, real music. So he said, "What does real music mean?" And I said, "It basically means that we play great music and we don't care about what genre it is, you know." So I think, you know, we basically probably after about 6 months proved that we could run a good music station, but it wasn't particularly relevant to our wider business. And then we've been on this journey now since about October, so about a year now, where we've been adapting, learning, and I think we've just about got it now. So.
And it was quite disruptive, you know, because as you say, as an accountancy firm, you know, you wouldn't expect you to launch a radio station, and you're disrupting the sector. And as we're going to get on to sincerity of ambition, you know, you certainly did have the sincerity of ambition to actually get this to be a national radio station.
Yeah, and I think, you know, coming back to you know, the courage word, obviously, you know, it would be wrong to say that all of my colleagues in Aspen Waite are delighted that Aspen Waite Radio was born, for instance. You know, so you know, I think sometimes when you're someone like me who dares to do something, it can be quite easy for other people to criticise you and say, you know, why are you spending that money on that as a waste of time? As we all know, you know, if we look at marketing spend, it tends to be one of the things that first goes out the window during recessions or when people get into difficult times. And of course, you know, if you actually look at, and this is where the courage comes in. The truth is, if you're experiencing a reducing market share, for instance, probably the need to market never becomes greater, does it? You know, but obviously the tendency is to say, well, I've got less money, so you know, I'm not going to spend.
Do you want to move on to the...
Yeah. We'll be here for hours, won't we? I thought. as we talked about having values and building a culture, I think that's very important. And I think one of the things I'm proud about is if you look at probably all of my colleagues here today, they're essentially like sane versions of me, attempting to do the same thing. They all like people, they care, they want to make a difference. So Samantha Clyde here, very important in our transition from being an accountancy firm to a professional services company. So Sam is a specialist in partnerships, aren't you, Sam? So I think one of the things we're extremely good at is we really recognise the importance of team. I guess together everyone achieves more, and that actually sharing is a good thing. I used to call it Paul's piece of pie principle. You stick up a thing of Desperate Dan, who's my brother, with his big cow pie, and sort of say, well, actually that much of the cow pie is better than just a little pie, So working with other people, so we're a good example, Yeah. So we have a relationship which does good for the community in terms of the charity. We provide free business advice to thousands of people, but there's also a commercial element to it as well. So and also I think why would you not want to work with nice people? At the end of the day, rather work with a nice person without being twee about it than an unpleasant person. Of course, this is something probably. Sorry, you're going to say something there?
No.
So this is something probably companies don't do very well. And I think marketing is probably the most misunderstood word in business, in my opinion. People don't understand the difference between marketing and sales, or what marketing is all about. I also find, as a very pioneering, brave person who's prepared to try things, that I find some of my senior colleagues expect. So we've got one in a minute where it says Rome wasn't built in a day. So marketing initiatives can take a long time. They can take 10 years sometimes. My analogy is you have the low-hanging fruit, as people understand it. Things you can pick now. But I often will say to people, I've got crops growing in fields. Some I can see, and some out into the distance. And some of those crops, could take 5 years before you can harvest them. But I think it's very important that in business you don't just think about today. So I'm thinking about 10 years' time, all the time. So obviously time will be will tell whether this was wise or not. We went into the pandemic very much probably with over 50% of our turnover in one particular activity, and I very much was of the opinion that wasn't a sustainable model. So I wanted to make sure that at some point, as quickly as possible, that we would be a much more diverse business that was not dependent on any particular activity. So effective marketing strategy is key. Obviously, strong vision. We're having a vision. I mean, I would probably say most businesses don't really have a vision. I think it'd be quite interesting to ask most people when you say, "What's your vision?" And I think you probably get a bit of a blank. Passion for your business, I think it's personally, I think it's really important. I think passion's infectious, or enthusiasm. I've always had that since I was a small boy. I remember my history teacher saying something about Paul's enthusiasm is sometimes misplaced or something, nonetheless it existed. So, and obviously, as we talked about, diversity.
I mean, Paul, when you say passion for your business, obviously you've been in business for 27 years. How do you keep finding that passion, for business? Have you always got it, or where do you get your passion from to keep going?
Well, I think in our world, and I think literally something happens almost every day. So because we've got so many different business segments now, as you know, so we've got not just radio, we've got food. We've got food. And then, of course, we've got our friends from Social Media Directions here today, who were also at the talk 2 years ago. One of the things we do is we also help businesses that are growing, sometimes with investment and mentoring, etc. I think if you're continually evolving, adapting, creating new income streams, then So Oksana here is head of our international business. So we've put a lot of effort into developing a quality relationship with China, for instance. So we have fantastic partners in China, but we've probably put more than 2 years of investment into the business before getting our first client, I would think. That's probably about right. Yeah?
Less.
Yeah. Well, it depends which lifetime you're talking about. So anyway, so I think it's you're either that sort of person or you're not, aren't you? I think I'm one of those people that has a fire, it doesn't go out. I'm actually more ambitious today than I was when I was younger, to be honest. So I think it depends what sort of person you're. Obviously, you've got other people who can't wait to retire. So there's no right or wrong in that, is there? So where would that? So I think consistency is very important in building a business. So if I'm allowed to swear, so I think if you're going to be a bastard all the time. I used to work with a guy that was a complete and utter whatever to work with, and then we played hockey on Sunday, and he was lovely, and it was like he didn't know what to do, and it was like I would much prefer it if he was a bastard on Sunday as well, to be honest. No, I think being consistent is very important. I think. Especially if you've got staff working for you, and I think it's consistency is important in behaviour and also in terms of things like brand image. Obviously, technology. So we invest very heavily in technology, and one of the things I'm very proud about. So one of the things I decided. So we got very heavily involved in research and development, and as I was actually chief executive of a biodegradable polymer company when I was only 30 years old. So we now have a company called Aspen Waite Sustainable Energy, which has a world-beating portable anaerobic digester, for instance, which has the potential to make millions next year, I hope. So we're great believers in not just advising on innovation, but also innovating ourselves. And I think it goes without saying, if you're able to say to a client, actually, I know what I'm talking about. I'm not just sort of coaching you. It has a certain degree of weight, doesn't it? Obviously, a business is really only as good as its people, in my opinion. So a business can only be great if it's got great people. So I think people need to be treated well, and obviously it's very important. We're just having a quick introduction today into what a business needs to do to make itself ready to be sold, basically, or to be passed on. So. If someone's taking over a business, obviously knowing that the incumbent employees are going to remain in situ is incredibly important. I suppose that goes back to the point you were making about me not getting paid until October the 13th, 1993, when I started, is being prepared to make sacrifices. So I've actually put more money into Aspen Waite in the last year than I have in the 27 years before it, actually. So I think it's very important that, especially for someone like me that's prepared to be different, that people believe in you. You're not what I would call a false prophet. You're putting your money where your mouth is. You're saying, I'm not just telling you this is going to happen. I'm actually putting my cash in. So I think, and prepared to make sacrifices also means things like not going on holiday when you need one. Working on Saturday morning when you don't really want to, but the business needs you to, things like that. As we talked earlier about sincerity and ambition, I think it's something I think is incredibly important. How much do you really want it? How much do you, So if you sort of take a sporting analogy, you're never going to win Wimbledon if you don't think you're going to be the best tennis player. So how are you going to be the best tennis player? Train, practice really hard, get a good coach. But also is the psychology of it as well, isn't it? So it's not just the technical skills, it's the self-belief, as we were talking about earlier. So sincerity and ambition, I think, is extremely important if you're a business owner. As we discussed earlier, creating a brand is incredibly important. So look at what your competitors are doing. I think in our case, I generally don't really think that we don't really have any competitors. We have competitors in some aspects of what we do, but it would now. So one thing about being crazy is I think it would be almost impossible for someone to try and build a business like ours, because it came about in such an eclectic way on the basis of this sort of rather odd experience mix, Because effectively what I've been able to do is to run Aspen Waite whilst having some parallel careers inside it, you know, which has created an unusual mix. So I think one of the most important words in business is adapting. So I think adapting, you know, so one of the things I say is what's good enough yesterday isn't good enough today, and what's good enough today isn't good enough for tomorrow. So it's looking at yourself as a person and looking at your business all the time. You know, am I fit for purpose? How can I tinker with this business? How can I make it better? You know, what's the next best thing to get into? Always making sure you're one pace ahead and investing in your future. As we talked earlier about Rome wasn't built in a day. So probably better run through this or we're going to be here till 1 o'clock. So so preparing your business for sale. Just run these very quickly. And of course, if anyone has any comments, then please do interject. So it's always nice to have a bit of...
We're going to come to questions in a minute, yeah.
So, of course, we're talking about planning. So it's never too early to start planning. So I think I remember one particular client in particular drove from Portsmouth to Bridgewater to see me on recommendation. And this was a start-up business. And right from the first day, he ran that business like a small PLC.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the standard, and I think it was fantastic. So, you know, there wasn't this sort of, you know, when I get bigger, I'm going to do this. You know, obviously incredibly important. This, if you're going to sell your business, the business has to be able to operate without you in it. And I'm just being a bit technical now. So there's most of you, I hope, will be aware of the concept of goodwill. So goodwill is basically, I guess, the capitalization of future super profits. That's probably how I would describe it. And what you find sometimes in businesses, particularly small ones, is actually the goodwill doesn't really belong to the business at all. It sits in the person, you know. So let's say, you know, say it's just me, right? Actually, everyone loves Paul, but they don't really love Aspen Waite. So if Paul dies, Aspen Waite doesn't have any clients. So that would mean that all the goodwill was effectively personal goodwill. Do you see? So obviously, if you're going to sell your business, it's very important that you've got value that someone would wish to buy. Very important that you have excellent financial information and forecasts. Again, probably this is an area which would be neglected by the majority of businesses, I think, don't have anywhere near good enough management information. And of course, if you don't have the right information, you can't make good decisions. Something I think is incredibly important, ensure your accounts show the correct position. And I'm just really, that's aimed at, I would say most clients would have a desire to pay less tax than they should we say? And of course, you know, if that is how you are driven, it will affect how other people perceive you. You know, if you have lots of provisions in your accounts and the balance sheet is not as strong as it could be, then you don't be surprised when your business has a lower value than it would be. So I think you have to make a conscious decision as to what is more important to you. I always remember sitting in the garden with a guy that's almost become a family member. So this is a good example of how, if you do business in the right way, you can actually not only do a business transaction but create a friend. So I was actually acting for a client, talking to this guy who had a groundworks civil engineering business in Warsash, which is near Portsmouth. And John was sat there with his gin and tonic, which he did a lot, and we were talking about his accounts and the not very strong profitability, and he pointed at his house. And I said, so what you're, well, after a while I said, so what you're telling me is the business's profits have been siphoned off into building your house? And he went, yeah. And I said, well, I don't give a shit, you know, because they, you know, it's all very well. He might say that he had £400,000 or £500,000 siphoned off his business into that, but it wasn't something that you could sell to the open world. So I think honesty is very important. Be honest, full disclosure. People are going to do due diligence anyway, so get the bad news out of the way straight away. And if it's a problem, so I actually get, so I've actually at the moment, so I actually have approaches made to Aspen all the time. Yeah. Top 30 businesses or top 10 businesses going, you know, you're the best this and the other, we want to buy you or whatever. And I usually, well, the first things I say to people is I'm unemployable. You know, you probably need to get your head tested if you had to work with me. And actually, surprisingly, most people still talk to you after that. But I think it's very important to to get that out very early on. You know, so what's the point in running 3 months of due diligence and then finding out that, you know, your skeleton in the cupboard or whatever, it comes out anyway. So, you know, if there is anything, just say it as it is. You know, we've got a legal dispute. I've got a problem with this. You know, whatever it is. Obviously, you know, ideally you show a trend. So you want to build a business that has a trend, a good profit trend, a good sales trend. Of course, you know, knowing the right time to sell is quite important. When's the best time to get out? That could also be a personal decision. So I've got a client at the moment where we're grooming to sell, and they've just basically had enough. You know, Matthew is 40 years old probably at the most. He just doesn't want to do this anymore. You know, he's had enough. He wants to go and do something else. You know, nice business. So moving on, reasonable leverage. So basically, you know, not being overly borrowed. So not very attractive to a purchaser if you've got huge amount of debt in your balance sheet. Make sure all your agreements are in place. So, you know, so your company secretarial positions, so your shareholdings, you know, so the shareholding matches what it says at the company's house, and you've got all the memorandum articles done properly and shareholders agreements, etc. You've got proper contracts of employment, all this sort of stuff. So what again, you don't want people to go and do their due diligence and have easy wins, do you? So you want to make sure that everything you do is fit for purpose. Obviously, tax planning is really important, and that goes with the post-tax profit. So, for instance, you take R&D tax credits, something we're particularly expert in. If a company takes R&D tax credits seriously, they will probably, at worst, halve their tax bill. What does that mean? So if you think about, you all probably heard about earnings, cash earnings, EBITDA, earnings generated from businesses. So obviously if your earnings go up because your tax goes down, then you know, that 10% of tax goes into extra value, doesn't it? So which comes, you know, which is again, I think probably the fact, I was thinking about this, what I was going to say today, I think the fact that you guys are actually here is a very positive thing, because I think an average business person wouldn't go to the Expo in the first place. So I think the mere fact that you're here shows a degree of dynamism and, do you know what I mean? And maybe a resourcefulness that isn't shared by the herd. And so I think one of the things that's quite important, and it takes maybe a bit of maturity and experience to see this, is it is always better. I call it the fairy liquid principle. You know, so often, you know, people try and bash me down on my price, and I say, you know, you might think I'm a Skoda, I'm a Rolls Royce. You know, if you don't think I'm a Rolls Royce, fine, go and buy a Skoda. You know, I'm a Rolls Royce. So, you know, I think spending quality money with the right people and having people you can trust, who give you great advice, will make you money many times over what might appear to be the apparent cost. So obviously, you know, you want to make sure that if you're going to sell your business, it has a sensible value, because otherwise, no one's going to buy it anyway. We talked about staff earlier, and obviously the thing about first impressions. So, exit strategies. So very quickly, probably maybe the one that's most common, and I think it's interesting. I don't know if any of you have heard of employee ownership trusts, for instance, or employee share schemes. Very en vogue at the moment. So I personally had 3 separate inquiries from company directors wanting to incentivise their employees in the last 4 weeks. You know, I've got 2 key employees I really want to, you know, bring into the business. How can I give them a shareholding in a manner, you know, that rewards them? But I don't want, you know, I don't just want to give them to them. You know, I want them to earn it based on targets and things like that. So that's something, I just for the purposes of today's, it's not supposed to be a complete and utter presentation on how to sell. But one of the things that would go into this would be an employment ownership trust, which is a very tax efficient way of passing on a business. So probably quite commonly, how is the business is passed on to a family or a friend. So typically that would be, you know, probably a family business. Son or daughter comes into the business, and the business passes to them in some way. Also very common, management buyouts. So you have maybe the owners, maybe the chief operating officer a bit younger or something, and basically the owners say, would you like to take over the business? And then it's a case of, and quite often you find this is of unlocking funding in the business through things like invoice finance, for instance, where you can actually take the value out of a business to help. So I find actually that sort of management buyout thing can often be one of the best ways to leverage maximum value, because if you can make it affordable, so that the person taking it over isn't feeling the sort of burden of debt, but it's manageable, then probably the person who's exiting can actually receive more value, but in a fairly painless way. Obviously, mergers and acquisitions, so just effectively, selling your business, trade sale as you'd call it. So, looking, and usually you'd find with most businesses there will be a logical buyer for you. There'll be 3 or 4 businesses that would be obvious people to buy your business, I would say. And that's and of course sometimes as well you can get together with other people, and that can help you facilitate a way out. They've got probably a bit more sophisticated stuff like initial public offering, an IPO, and then lastly, so we've got to be realistic about this. So sometimes businesses exit because they don't want to, or it becomes the least bad option, or least worst case option. So sometimes you have to get out by liquidating because of a failing situation. And again, I think the situation there would be make sure you get advice at an early stage, look to see your options, and if you act early, then, and of course, particularly at the moment, one of the things that's come out of the pandemic is there's been greater protection given to businesses against creditors. And of course, the other one, which has become, which would have been unheard of 10 years ago, I think, really. There we are, it's got to the top now.
There you go.
Yeah, because he had a friend and he bought good equipment. Yeah. Poor advisor fell off a bit earlier.
So has anybody got any questions for Paul? Don't be shy. It could be anything that Paul's talked about. It could be about anything entrepreneurial, business, exit strategies.
So he talks about not all eggs in one basket, diversifying and all that, and that happened. You've invested more in the last 12 months than you have in the last 20 odd years. What was the trigger for that, apart from COVID? I guess that's part of it.
Well, as I say, so about 8 years ago, I had this sort of epiphany, genuinely, that we needed to move away from being a specialist firm of accountants into a diverse business services offering. And then, one of the things I often say to people is I've not had 2 lives. And I think it's quite an important thing to say that, because people often look at me and they know what I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. I've not been the chief executive of a business that's had 28 years experience before, so I'm learning on the spot. So you make good decisions. You do what you think is the right thing, but you run into a cul-de-sac. You have to go back at the cul-de-sac and go again. So you refine. In my case, I would say probably the people I thought were the right people to help me get to where I needed to get weren't the right people. They didn't have the same values as me. And then, so Sam, for instance, was a pivotal moment in my life, meeting Sam, because she was the right person in that respect. So, I've become frighteningly like her over the years, which is apart from not eating sparrow curry on a Sunday. So it comes out to sincerity of ambition. So I wanted to create this. So basically, the way I look at it is trust is, it's good about trust. So there are a lot of bad businesses out there, aren't there, that will exploit people or not give people very good advice. So the way I look at it is I have a lot of people who trust me completely. So if I can sell them more than one product, that's a good thing, isn't it? You know what I mean? Because you're someone they trust. So if you can give them 5 things they can buy from you, that's got to be a good thing. So that's the sort of basic, simple concept. And then just really a case of, what I call it, you have the light bulbs in your head, so you know what you want to do, but sometimes you need to meet the right people, So take Jono there in the lovely full head of hair there. So Jono, for instance, was someone who we started working with in the government's business growth service. And the government did a very good thing from our point of view because they closed the business growth service down. And Jono ended up working for us. So what happens every time, Sam, Jono, etc. come in, you get some different perspective, people with different business experience, but compatible values. So as I was saying earlier, I wanted to create an Aspen Waite which was solid and diverse and wasn't overly reliant on any one product. So I probably didn't, to just be clear, so probably the process, so for instance, Aspen Waite Radio started really, the investment in that would have started about 2 years ago. Food would have been at least the same. It's I guess over the last year there's been an increased momentum, not least because our core product has come under some pressure because of the way people have reacted to the pandemic. So if nothing else, it has made actually my vision far more credible because I think other people can see now how important it was to have that level of diversity.
Have you worked out how you're going to make all the sandwiches you've been asked to make yet, Paul?
Well, as you might expect, I have a plan.
Yeah. But tell the audience, what with the opportunity that's coming for Aspen Waite Food last time we spoke.
Well, so we potentially have an order for £7.5 million of sandwiches with a leading company. And so again, I think it's very important. So I don't know whether you would think that the natural inclination would be think that was a yes or a no. At this moment in time, I'm probably more no than yes because I'm sitting there thinking, how am I going to make £7.5 million of sandwiches? Now, one of the things which is true about Alec and myself. So I've started working with a fabulous charity in North Devon, which has grown from 0 to 160 employees in 3 years. And they basically employ disadvantaged people, mostly autistic people. They're only allowed to work for 25 hours a week, and they've grown a business manufacturing furniture to 3.5 million turnover. They have, as well as that, they have a farm. They make all sorts of other products. And the government basically offers grants. So basically, let's say a typical person costs £15,000 to employ. On average, the government will give you about £30,000 to employ that person. And it's actually quite humbling to go there. I think it's one of the things I would encourage you all to do. I think taking an interest in other people, the wider community, is actually good for yourself. I remember first time I went there and I was watching them working and going in the cafe, just watching how people went about even cooking an egg, and how much care they took over it. It was quite mind-blowing. So my strategy, just for all it's worth, just to answer the question, so my strategy with the sandwiches is I've gone to the charity and said, you and I are going to make £7.5 million of sandwiches together, and you're going to employ all the people. Fantastic. Yeah, there we are. So resourcefulness, you see.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, great talk. Really enjoyed it, got a lot from it. You talked about the importance of information, financial information, and also the importance of marketing. I wondered about combining those two. What about the importance of specifically marketing information? So I'm talking about the importance of understanding the real market opportunity, understanding where the best opportunities, best targets, if you want to use a hard term, are in the market. Do you think large companies do one hell of a lot of that? Often it's called data science or something like that. Mm-hmm. Do you think small businesses should be doing more of that sort of thing, i.e. marketing, data and analytics?
Yeah, well, I mean, what way you love it?
We talk to Aspen Waite Media, doesn't he?
Well, no, obviously the answer is yes, of course. I said earlier, didn't I, that marketing is the most misunderstood business concept, because I think it is. And people don't really understand what it means or how to go about it. I would have to say, I'd be interested to see what Charlotte and Sam think about this, for instance. I would say, so we've just launched an environmental consultancy business, which I'm convinced is going to be the leading business in the whole UK, actually, because I don't think anybody outside of the top 4 firms of accountants is offering this service. And of course, the top 4 aren't interested in SMEs generally, now, being truthful in answering your question, I couldn't really say that my opinion and how we developed that product was based on hundreds of hours of analytical work. It was based on 30 years plus of business experience, actually having, knowing what the market's about, what people want, and also using a perception. Where do you think this is going? So, in my opinion, for instance, we had a situation where large companies had to report things like emissions, and their carbon footprint. You don't have to be a rocket science to see this will expand to more and more and more companies. And of course, because people now are genuinely, despite all the rubbish that's talked at the current conference, in Glasgow, I think people are genuinely environmentally conscious, and people do care about, the environment. So, I guess to some extent, what I've done is with my colleagues involved in this space is to say this is what I think the market wants, and I'm going to develop, this range of products to meet that expected demand.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Two, is that all right? Yeah, I've got 2 questions. Firstly, on the your support for those that aren't always employable in the traditional context, those with ADHD and problems which they would see the world in a completely different way, but brilliantly, but in a traditional environment would normally be rejected or put to one side.
Mm-hmm.
So does your organisation support that kind of employee?
You mean, does Aspen Waite itself employ disadvantaged people? So the truthful answer is, so I would say, how can I put it? So we don't, so we basically welcome anybody, regardless of size, age, etc. I think sometimes, you can only be shaped by things you know. So, I found the experience of being introduced to the charity in Devon I was talking about, and watching the people go about their work and having a chance to talk to them, and then finding out some of the backstory. Things like something like over half of the people's parents don't feed them when they go home and things, and lock them in a room and don't talk to absolutely, and you go on.
I was just going to say, well, we do, because we've employed somebody that you met, who you haven't even met actually physically, up north. She's disadvantaged, she lives on her own, she's had to take in her brother's children. We didn't know what we were going to do with her, so we went through a process of assessing what her abilities were. Given that she's up north, she's not had any business experience, she's on her own, she's now going to have to work in a very difficult environment. We established quite quickly that she was good with data, so now she helps us with all our back office data stuff, and now she's got a job, and she's on our books, but it works around her needs, but she's got a job. So, and she's really good at it. So
Yeah, I think
that's just one example of how we have taken someone. You haven't even met her, have you? You had a conversation with her.
No, I think I was giving a truthful answer to your question. So the fact is, without sort of making myself out to be a saint, so there are several people in this country who are massively better off because of my existence, but that isn't in line with the question you asked me. They're not better off because they work for us necessarily. They're better off because we believe in looking after the weak, and things like the rich looking after the poor, and all those sort of basic old things. So obviously one of the things that's happened as a result of my experience with the charity is it's now changed the way I think. So it was quite interesting, just to show, about vision and foresight. So I think it was the third meeting I had with the trustees of the charity. I actually said, and this is before I knew any of this big sandwich stuff was going to happen, I said, how do you fancy getting into sandwiches with me? And they, one of them sort of there. And I said, no, I'm telling you. And literally about 5 weeks after that, these things came up. And so I could then, so when it happened, I actually went back and said, right, and they went, yes, we want to do it. So it's actually been approved now as a real project. So potentially, because so one of the reasons they want me to work with them is they want to be a national charity, right? So what we're talking about here, so just to show the success of this program, I would say probably at the moment, every month that goes by, they employ 10 more people. Which is quite a significant difference, really, to the local community. So my idea is, so if you take the sandwich thing, you'd probably end up with 50 to 100 people given jobs. So I have a vision of the charity turning over between 50 and 100 million, being in place all over the country. Because now I can see. I couldn't see before because I didn't know. Do you see what I mean? So you can't have a strategy about something you don't know anything about. So now I've seen the wonder and power of it. Then we're embracing it.
Yeah. So all I was going to just add is that there's definitely kind of philanthropic foundations to what Aspen Waite does. This idea that Aspen Waite is a friend in business, but in life as well. We haven't even touched upon the Friends programme, which I think was created in the first week of lockdown. This idea of helping those that need help and perhaps can't speak for themselves. Obviously, Aspen Waite provided hours of free advice for businesses, blogs and expertise and so on. So I think that is something that the group can be a part of, and it definitely is the first thing that when I was joining the business you realise was part of the culture here. So that's just something I'd add.
One last question. Has anybody got one last question they want to ask Paul? One last question. Sir, do you want to ask a question?
No, it was about working capital, and it was associated with the prompt payment code that the government got out there, and trying to accelerate the working capital through because I think it's about 95% of the businesses in the UK are actually 50 people or less.
Oh, what?
So 50 people or less.
Yes.
They're
Of course.
Majority. So the working capital cash flow could be improved through the prompt payment code.
Yeah, it won't work though, will it? It won't work. I don't think it would.
That's interesting. I'd like your views on that one, but.
Well, it's a bit like it's a bit like the view of the Inland Revenue when it comes to why people don't pay their VAT, and they basically say, well, you have a public duty to collect the VAT on our behalf, and you're supposed to stick it in a separate bank account, or whatever. But the reality is that businesses have their cash problems, don't they? And they spend the cash, and comes to the VAT return period, and the cash isn't there. That's the reality of life. So I don't think any amount of regulation is going to change that. I mean, of course, and the reality is the big problem with payment isn't the 95%. So I'm not going to name them, but there's a company that I know very well that turns over £500 million in South Wales that treats its suppliers like poo. They delight in paying them more than 120 days if they're lucky. Treat them with disdain. Those people are the problem, not the small businesses employing 10 people, in my opinion.
Paul's here for the rest of the day, and also, Paul, we've got our next speaker, Nyasha, is up next. And you're also going to be speaking next week in Swindon, next Thursday, and you've got your radio programme. Tell people how they can catch up with you on your radio programme, Paul.
Yes, so it's actually been tremendously fulfilling. I think that's something I could have put into my presentation, actually. I suppose it ties in with passion, but I also am a great believer in fulfillment. If you're going to go and work, you might as well find it rewarding and enjoyable. And I'm probably the only person that, maybe I'm wrong, but so for instance, Jono that I introduced you to earlier, Jono is the chief executive of our Wantage office. And the honest truth is, you might say, well, why have you got a Wantage office? And I'll tell you the answer to that is because Wantage was the birthplace of Alfred the Great. I'm massively patriotic, and Alfred the Great is one of my great heroes, and I wanted to have an office in the town where he was born. Now you might say, what a crazy, nutty thing to do, but the fact is, it's a very successful office, isn't it, Johnny?
Yeah.
We bought a business there, and we increased the turnover by 2.5 times in 15 months, for instance. So I found the journey from watching. So Ben, for instance, who was my role model. Thinking, I used to call him Mr. Chocolate Voice, used to sit there and think, I'm never going to be anywhere near as good as him, he is the standard, to, I think, sort of reaching a similar standard but my way, so not in any way the same as him. So I now do the breakfast show on Saturday and Sunday, which I like to think is the epitome of everything we stand for, really. So as you can probably tell from my talk today, it's marginally irreverent, not very politically correct, say it as it is, have a bit of a laugh, and basically try to play what I think is the best music that's ever been created, and
And I love listening to you, Paul Meets, the interviews you've done with other entrepreneurs, and I think some of the top entrepreneurial tips that you share with those people is very insightful. People can get that on YouTube, can't they, Paul?
Yeah, I think one of the things, we're talking about, how the media, for instance, doesn't understand business, and when it's talking about business, it's actually talking about large business. I think one of the things that I enjoy and is very noticeable when if you go onto YouTube tonight and you go and see Paul Waite, type Paul Waite and see Paul Waite Meets, whatever, I think the thing that hits you very quickly is empathy. So you can see there's an empathy between me and the person, because I know their pain, they know my pain, I can relate to what they're talking about, and so you get this, so you're having a completely different dialogue than Laura Kunsberg would have with them, for instance, or Robert Peston or something like that,
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Paul's got 3 copies of his books. I don't know who you're going to give them out to, Paul.
Well, it's a competitive world, isn't it?
You're going to be raised.
I want to, so there will be a prize for the best handoff.
There you go. So Paul's here for the rest of the day, and Paul's still going to be here to answer questions. Thank you very much for your time, Paul.